Good evening, Rockville. Today is February 24th, 2025, and we're here to convene meeting 6-25. We're going to have a Pledge of Allegiance, and we have some very, very special guests today. We'll be joined by Cub Scout Pack 1753 Webelos Den, and they're going to help lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Welcome. We really appreciate you all being here. Thank you. Ms. Sarah Taylor Farrell, can you please do agenda review for us?
Madam Mayor and council members, the agenda has been revised this evening to include the boards and commission reappointment, the mayor and council's questions to 9A and 12A on the agenda, and a revised mock for the readings of the proclamations for the 17th.
Thank you. City Manager, we welcome your report.
Mayor Ashton, members of City Council, everybody, good evening. Just a couple of things really quickly. As we continue to celebrate Black History Month here in the city of Rockville, we're going to have the free unity gathering here in the City Council chambers tomorrow evening from 7 to 9 p.m. That was really originally planned a couple months ago, had to be rescheduled due to the snow. But we're excited to have that unity gathering to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So we hope we have good attendance here. Secondarily, hopefully people received an email from us today or yesterday, and it's really inviting people that have participated in Rockville's Recreation and Parks program to, one, thank you for participating, but also number two, to continue making our programs some of the best there are in the country. We learned from the National Citizen Survey that our residents really value our rec programs in a big way. So we're asking them to continue to help us by giving their comments on programs they've taken advantage of and programs they'd like to see in the future. So if you got the email and you can take a few minutes to respond to the survey, we'd appreciate it. It'll only make our programs that much better. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And in addition to Unity Day, I wanted to note that the county is also planning an event for federal workers and contractors who were impacted by the changes. It is also tomorrow at 7 p.m. It is virtual, and it can be more information can be found on the county's channels. I also wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge some sad news. Mayor Coyle was also a council member. His wife, Lorraine Coyle, passed away recently. I do think it's important to acknowledge spouses as well, because it takes a whole family to do this job. And we want to extend our heartfelt condolences to Mayor Coyle and to his entire family. Okay. Councilmember Van Grack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know this council has done a fantastic job over the past year plus acknowledging some of the youth sports championships. And I just want to note, while we're acknowledging the certificates of recognition for the state and national championships, the past few weeks for Rockville high schools have been fantastic with regard to championships. And I want to read through a list. First, Emma Colavito, who was the 2024 state championship for cross country, won just last week the 2025 indoor track and field 3,200 meter state championship from Richard Montgomery High School. We'll be having her here to recognize her other state championship, so now it can be a two championship recognition. Also in Rockville High School, their field hockey team made the quarterfinals in the Maryland State Championships, which is a huge acknowledgement. I think it's the highest they've gotten thus far in the state championships. For Wooten High School, the swimming and diving team competed at the state championships this past weekend. They actually, as a team, won the 2025 Doug Sutherland Sportsmanship Award for the Maryland State Championships, and 2 athletes won state championships from Wooten. Anna Nishnianzi won the 50 freestyle state championships, and Tyler Kopstick won the 50 free and 100 free state championship with a new state record for the 100-yard freestyle. In addition, the Wooten High School bocce team won the county championship. And finally, just this past weekend, the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, which is located in Rockville, their women's basketball team won the Potomac Valley Conference Championship. So I know there's some cheering going on in the background here in the chambers. So to all those youth championships and amazing accolades across the city, congratulations.
Thank you. And there are a lot of academic champions as well. That would take an equally double long time to say a lot of great talent here in our city. Thank you. We'll now move on to boards and commissions, appointments and reappointments. Councilmember Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I move the reappointment of Krishna Kumar to the Senior Citizens Commission to serve a full 3-year term until January 1st, 2027.
Councilmember Valeri seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Thank you. All right, we'll now move on to community forum. Welcome, Erica Wright.
Hello. I don't know, I should bring something up with me. A little bit sooner than I expected. Hello.
Welcome.
Sorry for my attire. I was kind of rushing over here. I actually live in Potomac, Maryland, and I was struggling to find the meeting for that one. But right now in my local community, actually right in my backyard, we have an issue with, the gold coin protected trees, the really thick ones that kind of stabilize our infrastructure. And we have a landscaping company that has cut them down under a forest conservation area. And there's a sign listed there, and they have cut the trees on the side of our property in kind of ambiguous territory across the street, and there was no sign saying whether it was for government or for anything else. So I'm here just to report because I know that they're state protected trees, and I wanted to alert anyone who could help me or alert to them because I think that's a big issue.
Thank you. We are come as you are here. You're always welcome. I'm going to ask that someone from our city manager's team meet you at the back of the room so that we can find out what jurisdiction you're in for sure, and then help get you to the right people to talk to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Would anyone else like to speak? Okay. Thank you. We'll now move on to a special presentation. The city has done a Human Services Need Assessment Report by Health Management Associates. While we are waiting for that to be set up, I want to acknowledge the Human Services Advisory Commission as well as the Human Rights Commission. I'm looking to our city manager. Do you need more time? We can always skip this and move on to the next agenda. We can take consent first.
Could someone see if staff's out there? I think Rika was supposed to sit in, unless there's somebody online that I'm not aware of.
Okay. If you're okay, why don't we move on to consent agenda
Yep.
item, and I'll give folks some time to set up.
Sounds good.
Okay. We'll now move to consent agenda item 9A. We'll come back to section 8A. We have a few items. Approve and authorize the city manager to execute First Amendments. This is related to contracts for asphalt, paving, patching, milling, and related maintenance work. We have 9B, approve and authorize the city manager to execute a First Amendment to standard form agreement. This is for construction, repair, and maintenance of concrete sidewalks, curbs, and aprons. And that is it for now. Do we have any questions about the consent agenda items? Okay, we have a motion to approve. Councilman Valeri.
I move to approve consent agenda items A and B.
Councilmember Shaw, seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask the city manager, would you like us to hold a few minutes, or would you like to go to the next action item A?
I think they're walking in the room right now. I'm hoping.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, here we go. Thank you, Mayor, for the courtesy.
No
Appreciate it.
problem. We are flexible. So I want to, again, we're moving back to agenda item 8A, Human Services Need Assessment Report by Health Management Associates. I want to thank Frederica Granger, who is in our Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as Ryan Trout. And welcome HMA.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm late, council
No,
members.
that's okay.
All right, so good evening. In FY22, the Human Services Advisory Commission and the Human Rights Commission did an amateur survey. They collaborated to do an amateur survey on the well-being and needs of the Rockville community. Sorry, a little out of breath here.
Take your time. You have done so much
from
for the
that,
city.
from that, the mayor and council decided that they wanted to have a human services needs assessment done to take a deeper dive to better understand the gaps and also the assets of the human services in the city. So through our Department of Housing and Community Development, the city entered into a contract with Health Management Associates, we have here today, to conduct this assessment. HMA has a great expertise in conducting human service needs assessments with a knowledge of national best practices, the skills to ask the right questions of the residents, advocates, and service providers, and the ability to analyze that data and come to recommendations for improving human service delivery in Rockville. We have here Uma Alawalia and Anna Bueno of HMA who did this work and are now providing this presentation. In addition to their work with HMA, they have both lived and worked in the city of near Rockville. Uma was the director of Department of Health and Human Services for 12 years under County Executive Leggett, and Anna Bueno worked for Mobile Med for several years, who is one of our local service providers. So you can sit here, or you can go up to there. Which do you prefer? Yes. And we have your presentation. Is it queued up? Yes, it queued up.
I know, just to acknowledge, I know there's some transition. Some of us were recently at the naming of the county executives building, which is now the Isaiah Leggett building, also known as the Ike. I know HMA folks were just there as well.
Looks like this. It's not queued up. No.
That one?
That one. How are you, Ryan? Thanks. That's fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
That was such a joyful event, I have to say. I hadn't seen some of my friends in 6 years, so it was really nice. So thank you for that. I have more pictures with Mr. Leggett than I can possibly take home. So my name is Uma Alawalia. I was the project director for this initiative that we took on, the needs assessment, and this is my colleague, Ana Bueno, who was there with me the whole way, and we have another team of folks who are not here today. We're happy to run through this assessment, our findings. You've already seen the report, so I'll be really, really quick. Let's see if I can. So just walk through really quickly the purpose of the engagement, the methodology that we use to conduct the needs assessment, our findings, and our recommendations. So we were engaged to conduct a human services needs assessment to identify gaps and opportunities in the services continuum to better meet the needs of the residents of the city of Rockville. So the whole intent was to see where there might be gaps and what could be done about them. And to conduct research on national best practices and then building out the recommendations to close identified gaps. So that was what was in our scope of work. There were certain things that the city said they wanted to see come out of this, if it was possible. One was they recognized that it was important to do case management during crisis for residents, the navigation and coordination during non-crisis situations for residents was sort of something we heard over and over again, this need for navigation, and we'll talk some more about it. Workforce training for both their residents and for city employees. And this is going to be more urgent now with all that's going on in DC. Support of residents' economic mobility goals, identification of any resource and service gaps, and better leverage partnerships with county programs and grants to close those breaches. And this was a particularly important point. The city cannot be all things to all people. And in scope of budget, the state's budget is larger than that of the county's budget is larger than that of the city. And so what does that partnership up and down look like? Defining human services. The first thing we wanted to do with the steering committee was to define human services. And so this list of services that you see on your screen, that's what the committee said, defined human services. It's also what showed up in the RFP. So it was quite consistent. Income supports, food, housing, transportation, behavioral health, healthcare, early childhood, out-of-school time programming, case management. So all the things that you see over here. We set up a steering committee. These are all the members of the steering committee. And I have to do a special shout out for Rika Granger. This project would not have been successful without her. And so she was our best friend throughout the effort. Every week we would have conversations and she would tell us, this is how you do it. This is where I want you to go. And so the directions were always very, very clear. So I really appreciate her. We did key informant interviews. We did focus groups. We produced this, we looked at the survey because we administered a survey and we did data review. And then I have to do a shout out to my friend over there, Dave Gottesman, because he put out a survey and then we put out a survey right behind his survey. And so we had to align and make sure that we were having access to both sets of surveys, that we were feeding each other. And so, and Dave and I knew each other from our time in county government too. So it's always helpful to have friends. We did interviews with city and county elected officials, key city officials, Human Services Advisory Commission members, community providers, faith-based leaders, community advocates, and consumers. So those were all the folks that we talked to complete this assessment. The survey itself comprised of 30 questions, 13 demographic questions, a total of 412 respondents. And of the 412, 82% were residents. The remainder were city staff and providers in some capacity. We also used the American Community Survey, the Behavioral Risk Surveillance System, the BRFIS. We looked at CDC's data, Environmental Protection Agency data, and then the 2024 City of Rockville Community Survey. So those were all the data points we used. Really quickly, I'm doing very high level because you already have the report. Residents, here are the pluses. Residents trust the city to meet their needs. So this is like a pretty significant and consistent response. There was really high quality of life ranking by residents. People like living in the city. They feel like the city really responds to their needs. City leadership is responsive, you're compassionate, and support needed social service infrastructure. And then there are strong provider relations. The providers know how to engage with the city. The expectations are clear. They do what they need to do, and they're supported. But there are some weaknesses. The social service infrastructure needs to be strengthened to meet growing need. So the need is surpassing the resources that you have. City residents are often unaware of city services. That is not atypical. People only pay attention to where the services are when they have a need. Rest of the time, they don't pay attention to it, right? But when they need it, they don't know how to get there. The navigation is weak. Then they say, oh, I don't know what's going on. I don't have access to it. Need more readily available mental health services. This is the continuing need, not just here. It's also, we see it around the country. And affordable housing. Nothing here should surprise you. These are all things that you hear about all the time. The opportunities to strengthen provider relationships and the relationship with the county to align the gap filling efforts. So whatever gap filling effort you are doing, there's a conversation that needs to be had with the county, and address key areas of need through grant making or partnership. Threats, there's lack of system navigation. They're confusing. Public systems are not easy for residents to navigate, right? It's difficult. Failure to address additional services, given the changing demographics, could be an issue. Inability to meet the growing needs, mental health needs and well-being needs of residents, and then failure to clearly define the roles of the city and the roles of the county in meeting resident needs. So here are the gaps that were identified: need for navigation, need for additional behavioral health, lack of affordable housing, and affordability for county residents living in proximity to city facilities and programs offered in recreation, senior centers, community centers. And so the recommendations are for you to strengthen city-county partnership, system navigation, care coordination, wraparound services, behavioral health, more behavioral health, and not by yourselves, right? In partnership, always in partnership with county, because they have a full-service behavioral health menu. And so what does that begin to look like? Housing, especially there were conversations, for example, about doing a match service. You've got a lot of single-family homes with aging residents, maybe a single person living in the house. You have the community college, there could be students there. Could there be a vetting matching program? Ideas like that came up. Aging, you're doing a fabulous job. The villages are a really good idea, and people over and over acknowledge how wonderful the villages are. So part of this conversation about aging in place and what does that begin to look like? And if you do have villages, how do you make the services then come into the home? People want to age in place, and what does that mean? And then services to at-risk youth and teens. That was a big one. The population's both getting younger and older, and the population that's getting younger, they have a lot of needs, especially in younger age groups with immigrant youth and things like that. Engage county in discussions, review existing contracts and grants to deduplicate and better align services. There is something there that's worth looking at. And to ensure creating a joint city-county human services advisory board, maybe. The county has a social services board. You have a human services coalition. Is there a way that some members of the city could actually sit on the county's social services board? Possibly. Having the city join existing county social service advisory boards, mental health boards, substance abuse boards. Just taking a look to see if there could be a one person, one slot sort of saved for city. Add on-site navigation and coordination at community centers, senior centers, and increase availability of Medicaid billable services at safety net clinics so that more people have access to behavioral health and healthcare services. Assess the feasibility of partnering with the county to identify additional locations in the county for crisis services. This is a particularly lovely idea that Rika loves, I have to say. She even wanted 2 sites outside of Rockville. And we were saying maybe 1. These are difficult moments. I don't know that we can get to 2, but maybe 1. And then continue discussion with county to improve the behavioral health continuum of care. Continue to expand senior villages in other neighborhoods in need within the city. Expand resources to strengthen pre-eviction programming. This is going to get even more urgent now. Emergency assistance, rental assistance services. And then leverage the newly passed ordinance about accessory dwelling units to create a match program between renters and landlords. Engage with county aging services and the whole Montgomery County being a age-friendly county, and the city is partnering with them and to do more investments, funding to close the gap. Increase Rockville Police School Resource Officers, their capacity to meet growing need. The officers had pretty heavy caseloads, and they really have a relationship both with the students and the parents, so that was a good thing. And then plug and play within the positive youth development ecosystem across county and city. The county has a very robust positive youth development initiative that includes libraries and health and human services, recreation, the police department, and so there's a way to put those together to offer out of school time activities, clubs, tutoring, mentoring, gang prevention services, and others to the mental health needs, housing, employment, and training for youth. And so there was an operating model that we thought if you were using a collective impact effort, which suggests there's a backbone organization and the city could play that role, and this fabric of nonprofits that are providing services are supported. It's sort of almost like a hub and spoke approach. So DHCD is the very center of the if you will, the backbone organization that's coordinating and providing services. And then part of the functions that they sort of engage in and support, coordinating information sharing, funder lead role, lead data collection, identify, manage local and, all the different fund sources, pretty braided funding, complicated, coordinate cross-system collaboration, co-create unified protocols around providers, particularly around sort of how reporting is going to work. They're going to come together on a monthly basis, talking them through. And these are particularly difficult times for providers. Residents who are afraid are going to come to nonprofit organizations for help. They're less likely to come to government. And so those nonprofits need to be really supported. Their leaders need to have greater resiliency built into them. So immediate next steps, I think, Ryan, are you going to do these 5?
Ryan, oh, I can.
Or do you want to, Rika? Because I thought this was your list. So. I'm happy to, but.
Sure. Yeah. So we worked with HMA to talk about what our next steps could be, and one of them is to look internally for how DHCD can immediately address the system navigation, care coordination, wraparound support. So we have already reconfigured our staff to better cover the navigation services in the near term, and we plan to hold a nonprofit symposium hopefully in April to present findings and solicit input. And we thought we would convene a meeting with the county and nonprofit stakeholders to form sort of a smaller steering committee to begin to discuss a partnership to address the collective impact approach to human services delivered to Rockville residents. And right now we're doing site visits for all of our current grantees for FY25, and we sort of begin to talk about that already. And to prepare, and in the near future, prepare a strategic plan to align the city services and grants in accordance with the findings of this report, and may present it to the mayor and council hopefully in the fall. So, like I said, in the near term, we've already reconfigured our staff to better cover the navigation needs, and we hope to use this assessment, to inform our division and our department on what the next steps are. So I want to thank Uma and Anna for their hard work. Anything else?
I wanted to take a picture so badly of Uma presented. Is that proper protocol right now? But thank you so much. We really appreciate working with you.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much. I know this is a special presentation and mayor and council members have shared questions in advance. I have conferred with our city manager, and it's my understanding that those answers will be posted online to the agenda book, and hopefully will this human needs assessment also be posted online as well?
There will be.
Okay, so in addition to being in our agenda book, there'll be a dedicated page to this topic. And I know some of my colleagues have discussed maybe, depending on the findings of the nonprofit input, that there may be another next steps discussion on this topic. But before you all go, feel free to take your picture if you want to do a selfie while we're talking. I could not let it go to say we really appreciate your leadership. I know you don't like a spotlight, Ms. Granger. But I can tell you, seeing your work from a council member to now, and I know I can speak on behalf of the entire council, we really appreciate all that you've done, the many years, the thousands of families you've helped. You've served as acting director of the Department of Housing and Community Development and kept the glue. You were the glue. And so I know you'll be retiring in March. I know it's much appreciated. We will miss you sorely. So can we give a round of applause for Rika?
That's my big late for my last hurrah.
Thanks, Rika.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, so we have taken agenda 9A, consent agenda, that is already approved. We're going to move to agenda item 11A, the introduction and possible adoption of an ordinance to amend ordinance 16-24 to appropriate funds and levy taxes for FY25, budget amendment number 3. And we welcome Kim Francisco as well as Stacy Webster. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. This is the third budget amendment for fiscal year 2025. Highlights from this amendment include a $1.2 million CIP transfer to support updated ADA and ProWeg guidance impacting the city's concrete repair and replacement.
Can I just pause you 1 second?
Yes.
Sorry. If someone could take down the previous presentation. Apologies. Thank you. Welcome back.
Sorry about that. Highlights from the amendment include a $1.2 million CIP transfer to support updated ADA and ProAg guidance impacting the city's concrete repair and replacement program, supported by reserves. A $2.1 million CIP transfer to replace all unspent speed camera fund support in the current CIP, including planned future appropriations due to the continued decline in issued speed camera citations, supported by reserves. An $800,000 transfer to the speed camera fund to offset reduced revenue estimates and to cover program costs for FY 2025 and 2026. Increased revenue estimates for the State Aid for Police Protection Grant, red light camera citation revenue, and investment earnings. One-time funding for several operating purchases and initiatives, including a new mobile command trailer, a replacement of a heavy-duty vehicle lift, several maintenance and repair projects, and a dependent verification audit. A $115,000 addition from the Housing Opportunities Fund for a housing needs assessment and targeted tenant outreach, and just over $300,000 to address urgent sewer fund repairs and improvements. Lastly, a $267,000 increase for Blue Plains operating costs based on billings from WSSC. A discussion of the city's unaudited general fund unassigned reserve balances can be found on the second quarter financial report, which is attachment 3. If this amendment is adopted, the total appropriations by fund would change as shown at attachment 1. Tonight, staff recommends that the mayor and council introduce the ordinance, waive the layover period, and adopt the ordinance. I'm here to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I have a couple of quick comments and questions. One is, it's great to know that there are less people speeding to result in less tickets. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Sometimes that kind of revenue going, it's not revenue, it's really meant to change behavior. And so when we see that as working, that's a good thing. And I imagine also you'll look and continue to see where cameras need to be moved to help improve behavior in other areas where the police say it is needed. Is that right?
That is correct. And I am of the understanding that a new speed camera just went in recently on Goody, and that's been performing well.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had or comment is just to acknowledge the additional funds being added to the rental assistance program. I know that many of us during the housing work session expressed a desire to pull those forward and really appreciate that staff are doing that. I know that especially with things going on at the national level impacting workers and people who may need help, that's going to be much needed. So I wanted to at least acknowledge that. And also some of the increases for the police support and supplies. The one question I have is related to the Housing Opportunities Fund. Mm-hmm. And so traditionally, we leave and we try to accrue money. I know my colleague, Councilmember Dr. Miles, we've been trying to find ways to add money to the Housing Opportunity Fund so that when opportunities come up to acquire or make major renovations at housing, we have money there. And so in the past, other sources of revenue we use for outreach and education. And so if you could just explain, this is a new thing, has not been done in the recent past, at least from what I know in terms of pulling money out of housing opportunity funds, which is to help acquire and support maintenance on housing. Why you're taking supportive services out of there and not the general fund?
Yep. Two-part answer to that, Mayor. Thank you. One is it's really a robust fund right now. There's a fair amount of money into it, and some of the programmatic activity supports ultimately building more affordable housing in the city, but I appreciate your comment very much. And not to be a spoiler, but I'll be recommending in next year's budget a significant increase in that line item to do more work in the affordable housing space.
How much is remaining in that fund? Because I know we used some to help increase the affordable housing piece working with Rockville Housing Enterprises, and that took out a good bit for a partial grant and partial loan.
We did provide $1.8 million, and that supported the Scarborough Square effort. We are anticipating that $1.2 million will come back to the Housing Opportunities Fund when they refinance that arrangement. That has not happened yet. The balance right now, I believe, is somewhere north of $200,000, but please don't quote me on that. I can provide you the exact figure. I don't have that right at my disposal.
Okay. I mean, my general comment, I think, is a slippery slope to start putting. We really do need to help support affordable housing in the city, and I think we need to be careful of tapping into that Housing Opportunity Fund.
Understood. Thank you.
Dr. Miles, I know this is something you've talked about. Is there anything you want to add there?
Concur, Madam Mayor.
Any other questions? Councilmember Valeri.
I'd like to associate myself with the comments of the mayor. Yeah, we don't know, and especially given the presentation that we just had, we see that, you know, the need to look and expand our affordable housing opportunities within the city. I think that that's going to be even more of a necessity, including the REAP funds as well. So just to be careful and cautious there. I would be remiss, and this is not either of you two wonderful women. I would be remiss if I did not state that while we're looking at the cost of renovating the dog park at Maddie Stepanic, which I myself have personally gone to. It is a lovely dog park. My dogs loved it. It would be very nice, and I'm going to bring this up again during our budget work sessions. It would be lovely to see a line item creating a walkable dog park in the southern part of the city. We've been asking for it for a very long time, and the residents there are still very much in support of it. So while I am personally very excited to see, I know especially the fencing in the dog park is in need of urgent renovation. It always makes me a little wistful because I know that there are other areas of the city, not just the southern part of the city, that would like to have their own. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Thank you. I appreciate you raising that. I was on council when the Twin Brook community really has been advocating, even before I was on, for the dog park and Twin Brook community. I also know that there was some work to start a dog park at Redgate Park, and I don't know where that is. I think that would be helpful to the body to know where that is. And just for history, since I know we have some new folks here, Montrose community had 600 residents ask for one in that community at some time ago. So I just wanted to raise that, and I know that was shared with staff. I'm happy to circulate, but it would just be good to see as we're looking at some areas thinking about equity in other areas. Dr. Miles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In addition to concurring with your comments regarding funding from the Housing Opportunities Fund, I want to thank you all for the creative funding that went into funding this survey. I think part of it, I think 30,000 of which came from the opioid restitution fund. Of note, I think there would be more money, at least coming to the county. And if there are other opportunities to leverage some of that funding to fill some of the holes, creatively, I think would be great. But again, generally share your concern, and hopefully we can find a way for it without what that will also allow us to continue to meet our goals with regard to supporting housing that's affordable and attainable.
I appreciate you raising the opioid fund. As we go into budget season, I know that we get money from cannabis, and that came up in the past. So perhaps those two can help with outreach and funding. My question is, it's not a large amount of money. Can't we just pull that house, instead of touching the Housing Opportunity Fund, pull that from the general funds or someplace else?
I mean, the answer is we could, sure.
Okay. I look forward to the comments of my colleagues, but I think, to me, that's preferable. Councilmember Miles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't, in order to do that, to change where the money comes from, is that a decision you make, Mr. City Manager, or is it something that we need to make a motion on, or?
We could approve with amendments. How do you want to proceed?
There's a number of different ways you could do it. You could do it tonight with an amendment. You could direct me to take it from some other fund at some point in the future, and I can do that administratively, either one, or you could adopt it on its face per the recommendation tonight, knowing that I heard from the council loud and clear that we're not going to be using operational costs and bill it to that account. So there's three options there.
Is the cleanest for the public record that we approve with the amendment?
Agreed. Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I mean, can you clarify exactly what you're proposing with regard to this particular ordinance?
So
that there isn't any confusion.
Absolutely.
I want to be fully transparent as to what we're proposing language-wise.
So at the bottom line, it's the money that is going to go into supporting outreach would come from the general fund, generally where the city manager decides from that general fund it will be taken. and not from the Housing Opportunity Fund, which is designed to help acquire and maintain affordable housing in the city.
And what is staff's position with regard to that change and how it could affect any funding issues?
Candidly, it's a very, very small change. It's $30,000. Again, if that's the will of the council, we can do that with an amendment tonight.
Okay.
Dr. Miles,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to,
you can introduce first
okay,
with the amendment.
I don't have the language in front of me, but it's all good. Thanks so much, Madam Mayor. Thank you all for your patience. I'm introducing the ordinance to amend Ordinance 16-24 to appropriate funds and levy taxes for the fiscal year of 2025.
With the amendment.
As amended, so that the $30,000 does not come out of the Housing Opportunities Fund.
Ms. Francesca?
I just want to clarify, are we talking about moving just the tenant outreach portion, or are we talking about moving the housing needs assessment and the tenant outreach out of the Housing Opportunities Fund and into the general fund? I just want to clarify.
Yes, not touching the Housing Opportunities Fund.
So the full 115,000?
Correct.
Okay. So that would, just for your clarification as well, doing so, we can do that, but then the addition to reserves currently as part of this amendment is a little more than $88,000. So that would mean that net difference would be a use of general fund reserves, which we can absolutely do.
Thank you. Okay, so anyone have any further questions? Councilmember Van Grack.
All right, so I know that with regard to the use of reserve funds, as you've explained, there's a certain levels that we want to keep for emergency purposes and for bond rating, all those other things. Does anything that we would do, knowing that it's now a larger amount, affect that reserves that we have on hand with regard to how we're assessing what we have to third parties?
No.
Okay.
Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, because it seems to me, and I mean, I'm agnostic to whether it's funded by the Housing Opportunities Fund or some other way, but we're talking about doing a housing needs assessment. So it makes sense to me to fund it by, the reserves from the Housing Opportunities Fund. I mean, it's just cleaner that way, but I'm open to doing it however we want to do it.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. The Housing Opportunity Fund has been a designated place where we try to push money in, through the sale of MPDUs and other ways to acquire new housing or help maintain and support affordable housing and quality housing. It has not been for operating expenses, so that would be a new precedent set in the city. So that's the change. Ms. Francesco.
I would also remind the elected body that the employee homeownership program has been stood up in the Housing Opportunities Fund. And I know it's taken some time for it to get going, but that funding was put in the Housing Opportunities Fund by the mayor and council, and that is a programmatic activity and
That's
not
gonna buy new housing, yeah.
I'm
To
sorry?
help people buy new housing.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And that was, I think, we actually put money into that fund for that express purpose, which is not a general operating expense. Councilmember Valeri.
Just super quickly. I know that folks have mentioned both the opioid settlement funds as well as the cannabis revenue and the distribution of that. I would just note that I would be, and it has been done in other municipalities, really setting those funds aside for very specific purposes because of how we got to the fact that the funds are getting us here. So on the state level, the cannabis funds should be best practices to utilize that for programming for youth and at-risk youth, like we just heard during the human needs assessment. I would be very supportive of that. In addition, the opioid settlement funds, while there hasn't been like a universal best practice, it would, again, looking at the human needs assessment, it would be, I think, ideal to augment some of our behavioral health services, utilizing those funds. I would just like to see us, there are some funds that are just, taxes and, but these two in particular have come about in different ways. So I just wanted to throw that out there to my colleagues, and probably more so for the budget season, that I personally would love us to see a more of a use of those funds tied to the funding.
Dr. Miles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Last quick point, I do recognize my colleagues' concern about the survey funding coming out of, housing. I do recognize the overlap. It has been my experience in learning that housing tends to be kind of a catch-up. It's housing plus everything else. They're tasked with doing more than just housing people. In that department in particular, I don't have to tell them what they do. Housing community development spans a lot. And I recognize also that it's a relatively small amount of money relative to the entirety of our budget. I think until we have a dedicated funding source, I agree with the mayor that we should be mindful when we take funds out. If there is a ongoing, continuous funding source and something that we proposed and passed, then I'm all on board. So I'll leave it there. That's all.
Thank you. I agree. And I saw Councilmember Shaw. Councilmember Fulton, are you online there? Sorry, I don't see your hand, but I think, is it?
Yeah.
Feel free to
Hi,
speak.
thanks. I'm just trying to follow, and I'm curious what our actual sort of governing documents about our fund restrictions are. Like, because if the housing fund is being used for the city to acquire and maintain affordable housing, that's one thing, and I would agree. And I also heard that it's not only been used for that, it's been used to supplement individuals buying housing, whether it would qualify as affordable or not. So knowing what the actual written restrictions are on the use of the fund would help me make a decision on whether it matters where it comes from.
Thank you. I see Ms. Francesca who wants to respond to that.
The Housing Opportunities Fund was created by ordinance, and the only real restriction is that the fund be used to support affordable housing activities in the city. It's pretty broad, the way it's written.
Yeah, and how has it been used in the past?
In the past, it's been used for capital acquisitions and to help retain and create more units, usually by way of the ROFRs and things like that.
And if you did not have money accumulated, would we have been able to help support the opportunities that came up to acquire new housing? I guess that's the question of what's the future vision, because I know that we've had situations where we're trying to look at, can we help acquire new housing? So it has been shared with us in the past or previous councils that it's important to build up a fund to kind of do that work. I know that was part of previous discussions, so I just wanted to share that.
In the absence of a robust balance in the Housing Opportunities Fund, the city could utilize general fund reserves exceeding the target should an opportunity arise that would require a significant capital contribution.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I don't know if there's enough REAP funding just based on the need that's happening and the unemployment. And I just wanted to ask, on average, how much is an eviction? Like 2,000 to 4,000? Do we typically share?
I can't answer off the top of my head. Councilmember, we'll have to get back to you on that.
Thank you.
And this is just through the end of this fiscal year. So as we go into the budget for the next year, there can be a look at where do we stand in terms of the need in the community as part of our budget discussions for FY26. Is that right? And which would start in July 1.
HCD is actively tracking REAP usage and the REAP needs so that we can right-size that for FY 2026. We also have a May budget amendment. So if we're seeing that there are even more needs and that the additional allocation that this amendment provides is not sufficient, then we can add to that on the May amendment.
Thank you. And I know many of us have asked about this REAP and active management, so we appreciate sharing updates with us. Councilmember Shaw.
So I just have a follow-up question, and perhaps you have to get back to me, but so the REAP funding is for rental assistance, but is it also for like moving, storage, any types of other types of expenditures around having to have an eviction?
My understanding is that the REAP funds are specifically for rental assistance, utility assistance, and emergency prescription assistance.
Okay, thank you.
You have another question? Okay, please feel free.
Just based on some of the evictions that I assisted with this year, I think if it's possible to actually expand upon that for like moving or storage would be really helpful. And that's something that we can discuss later, but I think that's useful.
Thank you. And I know that we're also tracking to see what the county is doing because they had changed their eligibility and then added 3.3+ million, almost 4, to bring the eligibility back up. So it would be helpful for us as council to, as we go into the budget season, to just be aware of the growing need in the community, how the fund's being used, and what additional needs there may be. Okay, so we introduced the ordinance. Is there anything else before we move to waive the layover period that you would like to share with us? Okay. Dr. Miles,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move to waive the layover period.
do we have a second? Councilman Van Grack seconds. All those in favor, please wave your hand. Raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Dr. Miles, Councilmember Valeri.
Yes. I move to adopt the ordinance with amendments to amend ordinance 16-24 to appropriate funds and levy taxes for fiscal year 2025.
Councilmember Shaw. It's been seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay, it is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much, team. We really appreciate all of your work on this. Okay. Now we have agenda item 11B, which is to authorize to file a zoning text amendment to implement certain zoning recommendations of the Town Center Master Plan, including implementation of floating zones. While our colleagues are setting up, I'll just say an intro. We recently approved the Rockville Town Center Master Plan, which we greatly appreciate, to the planning team and to the CMO's office for working on that. This is going to help us talk about next steps and how to move that plan forward. Welcome, Jim Wasilek. I know there's a bunch of panelists, Katie Gerbis, and I believe Jeff Mihalik, Barack Matite, Jenny Snap, Katie Gerbis, Holly Simmons, and Nick Dumai have contributed to this.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Jim Wasilek with Community Planning and Development Services. What's before you this evening is a potential zoning text amendment that would implement a floating zone regime within the town center planning area. You may recall that the mayor and council adopted a floating zone scheme as a result of the comprehensive master plan back in 2023. This would build on that and allow for a floating zone scheme in the town center planning area based on the town center master plan that you just recently adopted. And the purpose of implementing a floating zone now, as previously, is to allow for developments that want to implement the floating zone and take advantage of the new zoning to move forward in advance of the city's ongoing process to rewrite our zoning ordinance and adopt a new comprehensive map amendment. You may recall that there are 3 character areas within the town center planning area, and the proposed zoning text amendment has outlined 3 floating zones that correspond to those character areas. And those are the corridor floating zone, which corresponds to the MD 355 corridor character area, the core character area with a CCA floating zone, and the edge character area, which would have a ECA floating zone potential. The potential heights that would potentially be achieved in those areas correspond with the recommendations in the comprehensive town center master plan. So that is one aspect of the floating zones. There are 2 others, and those involve the elimination of the minimum off-street parking requirements for much of the town center, and also it eliminates the requirement for ground floor retail. So those are the 3 components of the floating zone amendment that we're bringing forward for your consideration at the moment. And you may recall that there are base heights and also bonus heights within the character areas. And we find that the proposed text amendment connects with your goals and initiatives for the city, including economic development, housing production, and affordability. You'll recall that the town center plan calls for an additional 3,000 new housing units, and this would, in theory, allow for more of those units to be built sooner rather than later. And also, it ties back to the climate action plan, supportive of mixed-use transit-serving locations. In terms of the text amendment process, the first step is what you are hopefully doing this evening, which is authorizing the filing of the text amendment and referring to the Planning Commission for recommendation. The commission will hold its own public hearing and provide a recommendation to you. Then it will come back to you as mayor and council to hold a public hearing, and then you will take action and make a decision on the text amendment. I note in terms of timing, we've tentatively scheduled should you authorize the amendment, we have tentatively scheduled the March 12th meeting for the Planning Commission consideration and recommendation. And on your 6-month calendar, the public hearing is scheduled for March 24th, 1 month from this evening. So we potentially could move very quickly on this text amendment, and we'd like your concurrence that is what you'd like us to do for you. So our recommendation is that you authorize the filing of the text amendment that would implement the floating zone recommendations and refer it to the Planning Commission. And that concludes our presentation. I am joined by my colleague, Ms. Gerbis, and others who can answer questions you might have.
Thank you. I'm not seeing hands yet, but I'll start with a few questions, and maybe some folks will raise their hands if they have anything to add or questions. Okay, so one is, I know that just because of the ULI report, it talked about over-retailed, there was no requirement for ground floor retail. Just to remind, I know that during the comprehensive plan, we talked specifically about areas that are mixed use in town center, that we would encourage soundproofing some of those windows so that we're not creating an issue for tenants because there are events and activities, particularly around town center, that could be noisy, and we know hometown holidays will be there. So there could be some sort of conflict if we don't protect the residents and think about that in advance. I believe you said that you'll be updating that someplace else, and I just wanted to bring this issue back to the fore because I do know that there's some potential movement to change ground floor retail to housing. So if you could just help us understand how that will, come forward and how can we protect future residents?
So I believe soundproofing requirements would fall within the building code, so a separate section of the city code. I'm not personally aware of the status of that. I know our building code team has been working on a series of updates. I'm just not familiar with that specific one.
Just because we're specifically talking about moving forward on Town Center, it would be helpful if staff can get back to us before this is approved, so that just we can get some guidance to the outside world on what we expect.
Absolutely, we will do that.
Okay, thank you. What did you say the timing would be for this? And related to that, do we have to have two separate public hearings, or can we combine one with the Planning Commission? I'll always ask this question when it's a timing matter.
It's certainly possible. The Planning Commission actually, they have a public meeting. It's not a public hearing per se, in the sense that it's advertised in the newspaper, et cetera. But it's certainly a public meeting where they take testimony and then make a recommendation. Certainly they can, if you wanted to have a joint public hearing, that's certainly possible. I'm not sure what the advantage. We're already on a very compressed timeline now to get it through the process. So,
Yeah,
but
I know
certainly
other
an option.
jurisdictions do it when we're trying not to overburden residents to come twice and streamlining the process. So I'll raise it. It's not, I don't feel that strongly about it, but I do want to make sure we're streamlining for residents. Did you have something on that point? Oh, no. Okay, Councilmember Valeri.
Thank you. As somebody who went to just about every single public hearing on a particular development, I would really like to encourage us to look at combined meetings whenever, or joint meetings rather, whenever is possible, because it really allows for someone's voice to be heard by both the Planning Commission and the mayor and council in kind of one fell swoop. It's a lot to ask residents who may be interested in something to come to what can end up being 4 different meetings. So this might be a nice, I think the advantage is that we can hear directly from each other on what the questions might be, and it kind of also fosters, collegiality, I think, as well with the Planning Commission. I've seen it in action in other jurisdictions, and it is a very collegial process when everybody is together in these spaces. So I would love to see, I think this would be actually an easy one to kind of start with as far as a joint meeting, but I would really like to encourage my colleagues to support this, because I think it will make generally these processes more accessible to residents.
Thank you. Councilman Van Grack.
I was just gonna say, this is something that I've supported as well, but at least for this, it sounds like you guys have put together a timeline to get this back to the mayor and council in a month with a public hearing before the mayor and council and the Planning Commission, so everything can go accordingly within a month.
That's correct.
Right, okay. So, I mean, I just want to be clear. I fully support that. I don't know if we, but it sounds like what you guys have us, this being, and again, I want to compliment, I know Nick DeMay was working on it. Mr. Russell, you've worked on it. The whole team has been working to get this to us and get it. So I just want to commend you guys for fast tracking it to get it to us here today and looking like hopefully we can get it done within a month.
Thank you. I'd also like to, if it's not combined, to make sure that we get a detailed input, just a summary of what people said, because it is a short time period. And asking people to come twice when people are stressed. We heard about the human needs assessment. People are anxious, stressed. There's a lot going on in people's lives. I just don't want to make sure. I want to make sure that if they tell it to one of us, we're all going to hear it. All the decision makers are going to hear it. And I don't want to burden our residents. So if there's a commitment that we will get the feedback and residents don't have to come twice, I'm okay with that. I'll leave it into your hands into what it says, but I don't want to make people come out twice within a month on the same topic. That's a lot. Related to thinking of the public, I know I had sent a note about making sure we're updating the public on our movement on this. And so I did see an Engage Rockville notification go out. How are you going to let people know about, and that was on Friday night. How are you going to make sure that people are aware of this going forward? Because we did promise lots of communities as well as people who signed up for Engage Rockville that we'll keep them abreast of every step. So.
Yeah, so staff has spent quite a bit of time thinking about what our communication strategy will be for this, especially given that it is a relatively condensed timeline, knowing time is of the essence. So we've pulled together a strategy that involves, we have right now 4 dates for updates that will be posted on Engage Rockville All of those will be posted on the site itself, as well as emailed out in a newsletter fashion to anyone who subscribes to the project. So for the listening public, if you're interested in getting those direct to your inbox, make sure you subscribe to the project at engagerockville.com/towncenter. We're also going to work with our communications staff here internally in the city to make sure opportunities for comment are published on social media, in the weekly Rockville reports, emails, all of our kind of standard communication tools that we have access to here.
Thank you. There are some people that had some, I know that staff is meeting with, for particularly the church, one of the churches that are in this community. You are going to continue conversations with them to help resolve their concern as it relates to Rockville Town Center, correct?
Yes, we are. Actually, the rezoning that they're concerned came out of the Rockville 2040 plan. And we are going to meet with the congregation next week.
Okay. And then my last two questions are, as we were looking at the Rockville Town Center plan and also just generally on zoning, it became apparent that we want to make sure we're honoring state law as it relates to transit areas, as it relates to faith-based locations. I know there's state property. There's not necessarily state property in this particular piece, but you will be looking at that and making sure that the outside world knows that we're honoring state law and that it's reflected in whatever you're putting out in terms of what people can do with their property.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then my last question is, you created some new zoning designations that hadn't had descriptions yet. Are you planning to accelerate that so that there's a meaning or a description around that? I know RO is one of them, for example.
As part of the zoning ordinance rewrite process, yes, we will make those available to folks that are following that process.
Okay. And then related to that, there was a discussion on layback slopes that I know you're going to be working out in the zoning ordinance rewrite, but I know that the town center master plan generally speaks to transition, so you'll be thinking about that as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? Councilmember Fulton, I'm looking. Everyone else good? Okay. With that, we need to make a motion to authorize the filing of the zoning text amendment. Councilmember Van Grack.
Okay, I move to authorize and direct city staff to file a zoning text amendment to implement certain zoning recommendations of the town center master plan, including implementation of floating zone.
Mike, please.
Oh, my apologies. I'll try again.
You can hear him?
I'm usually loud. One of the mics will
joke.
probably pick me up usually. I move to authorize and direct city staff to file a zoning text amendment to implement certain zoning recommendations of the town center master plan, including implementation of floating zones.
Councilmember Jackson seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All right. Thank you to staff. I know that we requested to see how we could continue to move the Rockville Town Center Master Plan forward, and you responded to the request, and we appreciate your work on this. And we'll be seeing you a couple more times.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge, as folks are getting ready to get set up, we are ahead of schedule here in the city of Rockville. We're moving to agenda item 12, work session on electric vehicle readiness plan. And this plan comes out of our climate action plan. So this is kind of a follow-on to that. And just give me 1 second, I'll turn to my colleague. And if you need us to take a break, we can.
Thank you, madam. I was just going to ask if we could take a bathroom break.
How about we take a quick break just to allow you time to set up? I know that you're trying to get presentation set up. Yep, all right.
Thank you.
We'll be back in the next 5 minutes. Welcome back, Rockville. Today is February 24, 2025. We're going to reconvene meeting 6-25. We're moving on to agenda item 12, work session on electric vehicle readiness plan, and we are super excited about this. This is a follow-on of the comprehensive climate action plan, which we got adopted 6 months ahead of schedule, and we're happy to see this one come forward as well. So I want to welcome Amanda Campbell as well as Erica Shingara, who are work very, very hard behind the scenes to do all our sustainability work. So we appreciate you coming back and sharing these next steps with us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. And we want to acknowledge the many other people in different departments and all around the city who've helped contribute to this plan as we've been working on it. And just to let you know, as we've been developing the plan, we've also taken every opportunity we can to implement as we go. So you'll hear some references to that work as we're going through the presentation. So I'm going to touch on the background of the plan and findings, and then Erica's going to talk about the actions and the questions that we have for you more specifically. So I'm first I have an introduction, and we're going to talk about, I'll briefly cover the three questions that we have for you for discussion at the end. And then I have some of the plan background and the purpose of the plan, summary of our community engagement that went into the plan, and our charging projections. Then we get to the recommended goals and actions list where Erica will take over, and our next steps, and the feedback and questions. So the purpose of the plan was, as Madam Mayor stated, is to meet one of the actions in the Climate Action Plan, and it's also mentioned in the comprehensive plan policies, and it will reduce transportation, greenhouse gas emissions, and air pollution. There was also a need to make sure we were in sync with other levels of government, including the county and the region and the state, as we're planning electric vehicle charging stations, and to help find partners for federal grants and things like that, and other grants. We also needed to take a look at the ways that the city touches electric vehicles, whether it's through permitting, the zoning code, building codes, policies, and plans, and see how we're doing, and further our community charging and equity. So here's a preview of the three main policy questions that we really wanted to get your input on, that were brought up several times in the community feedback as needs, and people had questions about them. And so as we're sort of implementing going forward, it'd be really helpful to have your guidance on these. So the first one involves curbside charging, specifically for people that may not have a garage or a driveway right on their property. The second one involves flexibility in the parking minimums that can help accommodate ADA accessibility in retrofitting parking lots. And the third is involving the charging rates that we want, the considerations for charging rates for city-hosted charging stations. So we'll get into these for later in the presentation. So the scope of the plan, it included several different layers of analysis, and we looked at existing and projected electric vehicle registrations and charging needs with our consultant. We reviewed all of our zoning and building codes and looked at where EVs were included and where they weren't. And we conducted extensive community engagement. We also had the consultant, ICF, develop a list of funding sources, rebates, different sources of funding and business models to help finance EV charging. We focused on equity, throughout the plan, and looked at barriers to charging, which so that's really woven throughout many of the actions, and we specifically looked at that, for placement of any city-sponsored charging stations. We also looked at the city fleet and did an update of that from the Climate Action Plan and how we can electrify our fleet and the charging needed for that to go along with that. And all of this led to our 4 EV readiness goals and 26 actions. So here's our community engagement. I'm not going to read through this whole table, but just suffice to say, we did a lot of it. We consulted with boards and commissions. We had a web page, we had a survey, we had tabling, and we even had a crowdsourced EV charger map where people could choose locations where they wanted to see a charger. And we also incorporated feedback from the Montgomery County's survey, because they're doing a parallel process. They're doing their own plan. And so all of this was incorporated into the plan as we're going. Some of the themes that we heard were there was a lot of support overall. People were really excited that we're working on this, but there were some questions about the cost of vehicles. Can I afford it? How to install chargers? There's questions about the technology and the city's role. And there's a lot of questions from folks that live in multi-unit apartments and condos, or they have shared residential parking in HOAs. How do we get charging to us? There was questions from folks that lack garages or driveways. There were also feedback that, accessible charging is really important. And some observed that our permitting process could be clearer and more transparent. And then many people did note charging gaps in the network where more chargers would be needed, especially to help, residents that can't charge at home. So here is the charging gap survey map, and I'll direct you first to the brown circles, which show by the size of the circles the number of votes that each of those different locations got. And the clusters of circles, there's a lot of demand there. And so we noted several of those locations: Rockville Town Square, the Swim and Fitness Center, Civic Center Park, Richard Montgomery High School, Twin Brook Library, Rockville Metro, Falls Grove Village Center, Congressional Plaza, Ritchie Center, and Wintergreen Plaza were really hot spots where people wanted to see more charging. So in this map also shows with the triangles, it shows the black triangles are existing chargers that are level 2, and the little lightning bolts are DC fast chargers that are existing in the community. And then the blue triangles show the current available city-hosted charging stations. The filled-in ones are the 5 Pepco charging stations that we got at no cost through our partnership with Pepco. And then the other open blue triangles and the purple squares are planned stations. The purple squares are the county planned stations. So we've already tried to, help to meet some of the need there that people identified. Some of those triangles kind of align with some of the circles. So ICF, so looking to the future, ICF did some projections modeling how many electric vehicles may be in the city over time. And so this shows that projected EV registrations from 2023 to 2025 in Rockville. And it goes from 2023, in the beginning here, we had about 1,800 electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. And that's projected to increase to anywhere from 30 to 36,000 by 2045. And there's 3 scenarios that you see there. The red is the business as usual. The green is the medium, and the high is blue. They're all pretty closely clustered together, all going about the same direction. So suffice to say that we seem to have many EVs coming to Rockville, and it becomes a higher and higher proportion of the total registered passenger vehicles that you can see. The total vehicles, projection is that dash blue line at the top. That's slowly. I need a pointer. That's where the lines are almost meeting. So this is good news for our greenhouse gas emission goals, but it also means a fair amount of infrastructure needed to help support those. And how much infrastructure may be needed. So using another model from Department of Energy, ICF projected the number of charging ports needed. And I want to focus on the column that says that's 2020 for 2030 to give us a near-term goal. And this is the business as usual scenario. So you can see single-family homes in 2030 are about 5,700 needed. So a fair amount of increase there, and some support, with permitting or maybe outreach, connecting people to incentives and so forth. And then looking at the level 2 charging, there's shared private gated access charging and public level 2. If you combine those, we have about 150 right now. And by 2030, if you add those 2 numbers, it's about 1,000. So it's about 7 times more than what we have right now, so that kind of gives us an idea of a sense of, how many more we need. DC fast chargers also are expected to be needed more, but at a lower rate because you don't need as many. So where do all these chargers need to go? So Many people prefer to charge at home. It's more convenient. Your vehicle's parked overnight. So, at single unit dwellings and multi-unit dwellings at residents, about 47% of our residents live in some form of single unit dwellings or detached dwellings. But the layer that needs the most support may be the multi-unit dwellings so that they can access charging as well. Then the next two levels up involve workplace charging, which is the second most needed, and relatively speaking, in terms of numbers of chargers to support fleet and employees. And then destination charging moving up for shopping centers, places of worship, places where you might go to park your vehicle for at least an hour, that you could get some charging from that. And that's mostly level 2 to fulfill those needs. And then DC fast chargers are needed to fulfill some, long distance travelers' needs as they're coming through so they can recharge. So we looked at a number of different map layers, looking at equity and looking at characteristics in our community to understand, where charging was needed. And this particular map shows residential land use patterns, and you can see the light pink is the single unit detached land use, and then the sort of salmon medium pink is townhomes, and they need some support depending on whether they have garages, whether they have a good place to locate chargers. And then the most support is perhaps needed where the red multifamily buildings are. So these are all found online in a web map tool so that you can zero in on your neighborhood and look at the characteristics of your neighborhood. And with that, all this information helped lead us to the goals and actions. And I'll hand it to Erica.
Thank you, Amanda. So to meet this growing demand for EVs, the plan identifies 4 goals and 26 underlying actions. Tonight, we'll present a high-level summary of these goals and actions. More details under each action with specific guidelines to guide future implementation is included in Chapter 7, which begins on packet page 313 in your packet. The first goal is foundational. It is EV readiness codes, policies, and procedures. That's aligning all of our codes and policies so they work together and streamline and make it easier for all types of property owners to install charging. The second is the goal is to develop a robust and equitable charging network to serve residents, workers, visitors, and the municipal fleet. The third goal is looking internal in our own operations for a clean municipal fleet and outlines what we're going to be doing for our own operations. And the final goal is for inclusive public engagement and plan oversight, making sure we're involving all members of the community, having transparency, incorporating. This is not the last time you'll see us working in the community for EV charging. For each site, we'll have to communicate and try to meet people's needs. It's just the beginning of education. And of course, plan oversight like we do for the Climate Action Plan. We're just going to touch along some of these high-level action lists. So for updating city codes and policies, you see 5 actions here that they all have to work together. Updates to Chapter 5, which is Building and Property Maintenance Code. Chapter 10.5, Forest and Tree Protection Ordinance. Chapter 21, Streets, Public Rights-of-Way, and Public Improvement Code. Updates to the Traffic Code, which is Chapter 23, and then importantly, Chapter 25, the Zoning Code. These are all in different areas of implementation. You saw some elements of the Zoning Code tonight. You've already seen some changes to the Forest and Tree Protection Ordinance, so we've been working along as those code updates are going through. And these are foundational to go to the next. Once we've got the codes aligned, then we can work on developing guidelines and applications that really streamline the processes and can be easily communicated to the community. Whether you're a private property owner or a homeowner, or you manage a multi-unit residential structure or commercial, trying to make these processes clean and efficient for the designers and the reviewers. So simplified applications is the first one. A lot of demand for the second action, the right-of-way EV charging guidelines and a streamlined approval process to help those without driveways or access to create driveways or garages and parking, and also townhouses that do not have, that have shared parking, because those are some challenges too. And then also design standards. So looking at some of the safety, lighting, accessibility, signage, just to have a kind of a uniformity in the look and feel. That helps the designers, it helps the people reviewing the plans, and it helps the users navigate and find the charging and utilize it. So, and the last thing on this slide is there's many things outside of our local control, so it's for advocacy. So our continued advocacy, we do this at the state, we've done it for PEPCO, looking at city advocacy for utility and state programs to support EV charging, such as station reliability, interoperability between charging stations, and incentive programs to keep the momentum going. The next item is a list of 6 actions for a robust and equitable charging network. And this is divided up to the different types of property owners. Each action is geared to helping that unique section, such as residential properties, how to help them install home charging, commercial properties, how to help them expand workplace, fleet, or destination charging, working with Montgomery County to expand public charging on their properties, also working with PEPCO, as we've already done for public charging, but also making sure that there's adequate capacity that they're providing to meet charging needs throughout the community. The 5th is identifying city-owned properties and rights-of-way to fill in the gaps and to leverage outside funding and partnerships to supplement charging when it's needed, when the private sector is not filling those needs. And finally, the 6th item addresses other types of electric mobility. Members of the community suggested that we make sure that there's infrastructure for electric bikes or electric scooters or EV ride-hailing or car sharing. So there's an element there to look beyond just vehicles. The next slide is not intended to be read, but on a little illustration of the work that has already been gone into the public charging section and trying to look at action 2.1.5, where the city can look to fill in the gaps for charging. As a result of the community feedback and that map that you saw with the brown dots, we took every action that we could to look for funding and partnerships to expand charging. We have the 5 public sites and 7 ports from PEPCO, which is at City Hall, Thomas Farm Community Center, Falls Grove, Manny Stepanek Park, and the Twin Brick Quarter. 2 more sites are in design and funded by the Maryland Energy Administration at 6 Taft Court in Rockville. And there are 8 other sites that are planned for future partnerships at the Swim and Fitness Center, Senior Center, Civic Center Park, and rights-of-way and multifamily properties, and Rockville Housing Enterprises, David Skull Courts. These have partnerships with federal funding. With a federal funding pause, we're monitoring what the items that are in orange, if there will be charging funding coming forward. Additionally, the county is planning fast charging hub near the executive office building. Did somebody call it the Ike building? Is that what it's called tonight? And level 2 chargers at the Twin Brook Library. So it's great to have partners looking all around our community to fill in those gaps. The next item is a clean municipal fleet, and there are 8 actions for that. The first 5 actions look at the different types of vehicles and equipment in our fleet. The first one is light-duty non-emergency fleet, where we've already been working hard at transitioning to EVs. We have 21 battery electric vehicles, 1 plug-in hybrid vehicle, and 3 hybrids. The second involves monitoring for medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicles. We're looking and monitoring opportunities to pilot perhaps a senior center bus, an EV, and looking at grant opportunities for that. The third involves different technologies, charging options, and duty cycles for police vehicles. Those are a little more charging. They have special duty needs. There's take-home vehicles. There's not designated a lot of parking or EV charging at the police station, so there are a lot of things that need to be considered for that section. The next item is clean technologies for off-road equipment, which we're already piling electric leaf blowers and chainsaws and other equipment in our landscape maintenance practices. And the 5th, after we do all these vehicles, we just make sure that we have training for staff that are using and maintaining those vehicles, so there's an action for that. The last 3 actions involve EV charging infrastructure, because you can't electrify any vehicles without the appropriate charging infrastructure. So the good news is that we already have an electric vehicle infrastructure CIP in the works that we've been working on. We've been using that to leverage outside funding sources. So that's the second one, looking to leverage state grants, PEPCO incentives whenever we can for both planning, design, and installation. And finally, once these chargers are installed, we need to maintain them and include them in an asset management. So the last item is just a plan to maintain and operate them for the long term. The last section of goals and actions is public engagement and oversight. And the first two actions relate to education and engagement campaign with all different members of our community, specifically with an emphasis on equity and looking at barriers to try to gauge our campaigns to address members of the community. And also working with Montgomery County on their regional electric purchasing cooperative, which has been ongoing for several years. And then finally, monitoring and reporting of EV planning progress through the Climate Action Plan annual report, which you'll be seeing in April. It's usually in April that we have it. So this is just a high-level overview of all of our actions. The next steps for the plan is tonight we'll take any of your comments and questions and your guidance, and we'll revise the plan in anticipation of bringing it back to the mayor and council on March 24th for potential possible adoption. And next is for an overview of the requested feedback. So we have 3 policy areas that Amanda discussed. I'm going to go in detail because there's a lot of words on this slide. I have a slide that kind of describes and puts illustrations for each of these actions. The feedback tonight is just to provide guidance. No policy changes will be taken tonight, but this helps us with implementation of the plan for future adoption. It will help staff research and fine-tune, get your feedback, research and fine-tune policies and proposals to come back with different ordinance changes or policy changes and other elements in the future. I'm going to go through each of these questions and describe them first, and then we will circle back and we'll have the slides back up to help you guide discussion. So we're almost there. So this first option has been very important and a very vocal component of the EV Readiness Plan and community engagement. For those that do not have a garage, a driveway, or a designated parking spot, they can easily install a charger. The community wanted different options that are affordable or have different site constraints for charging. And we researched 4 models that could all work within the city and wanted to gain, and there's pros and cons to each. There's not a magic bullet, so we wanted to share those options and get feedback for you. The first option is the vendor installed charging. So that is similar to what we've already done with Pepco. Pepco installs, they have a license agreement with the city, and they operate and maintain, and they control the charging. Washington, D.C. has a similar model, but they have an option where residents in a neighborhood can engage with their community and identify a need and work together, trying to identify a location where they would want it and work with a private vendor, and the vendor would install, operate, and maintain and take it through the process. So that takes away one parking spot and makes it EV, but that EV charging is open to all members of that community. So that's option 1. Option 2 is a resident installed charging station. It's a level 2. There is Montgomery County and Tacoma Park have a model where they have guidelines and a permit. So a resident can, if they can't install a driveway and they can't meet it on site on their property, they can apply to install a charger, as you can see in the second image. But that is just to charge their vehicle. It does not take away that the space is still public, so it doesn't reserve their space. It is open, so there are pros and cons to both. It is not EV only because it's open parking, and some members think this is it's a good way to provide level 2 charging, but some are concerned that it could potentially be damaged in the public right-of-way. It's a private asset in the public right-of-way, snow removal or something like that, so there's been some comments on that. The third is more of a model used in Europe. It is a kind of in the sidewalk and that's flush with the system, a duct or a trench or a conduit. You can have cables either for level 1 or level 2 chargers, and you can place the cords down and you can remove them when you're not charging. So it's not a permanent asset in there, and there's a little more flexibility. That would also require approval from the city. And the fourth model is only for level 1, and that is a guideline that Washington, D.C. and Vancouver use to extend cords across the sidewalks under a highly visible cover that meets the change in level and ramp requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is more affordable, easy to employ, it's temporary, and it gives you a little more flexibility with parking. So if somebody takes your parking spot, you can kind of move it on to another area. So there's a little more flexibility than a single spot. So options 1 we have used, option 2, 3, and 4 we haven't implemented or approved yet. If the mayor and council support them, staff could develop standards and guidelines. I will talk about the next 2 options and then we'll dig into these. The second item for feedback is, does the mayor and council support flexibility in the zoning code's parking space minimums to accommodate accessible aisles and EV charging retrofits of existing parking lots? The reason for this question is that the U.S. Access Board recommends a minimum of a 60-inch access aisle, as illustrated in the first photo on the left, along the entire length of the vehicle to provide people using mobility devices access to charging. Employing the standard for new parking lots is relatively easy. It can be incorporated early in the design process. However, adding accessible EV charging to existing parking lots may present unique design challenges because of site constraints. The photo of the middle shows the retrofit of Matty Stepanek Park that results in the loss of 1 parking space so that we could create the 60-inch access aisle for 2 accessible charging stations. This change triggered a parking study, which is that last image of all the counts, and we had to count all the spaces and see if it worked. The good news for Maddie is that we had enough parking. However, if this was another site that had limited parking, we wouldn't be able to, the property owner couldn't install chargings because you couldn't meet the accessibility requirements. So this is a significant barrier for retrofits of existing parking, because in most cases it's not practicable to add another parking space. To construct it, it would trigger other zoning, stormwater, forest conservation requirements. So if the mayor and council support flexibility, this could be factored into future zoning ordinance updates to allow for a reduction of the number of minimum required parking spaces only in retrofits of existing parking lots for accessible EV charging. And the final item for feedback tonight is which philosophy does the mayor and council prefer for setting a user rate for future city-owned and operated charging stations? The reason for this question is that the city's traffic code currently does not address EV charging and may be updated to authorize a fee for the use of EV charging stations within the city's operational control, similar to what we have for parking permits and metered parking. Some jurisdictions establish an initial fee and routinely update it through a fee resolution annually or biannually. Jurisdictions have different philosophies for rate setting. This slide shows 3 common philosophies. The first one in the blue is the no fee. Some jurisdictions offer free charging, usually based on limited time frame or in conjunction with paid parking. This is an example that Hyattsville and Falls Church has used. The second middle option in green is a cost recovery model that reimburses the jurisdiction for actual electricity use and some of the proportional costs associated with maintenance, management, operation, network fees, repairs and replacement costs. Montgomery County, Pepco, and Maryland have used this model. And the third model in orange is the revenue generator option. Some jurisdictions take a revenue generator approach that includes higher fees or dwell time or idle fees to encourage drivers to vacate a station when they're finished charging to encourage turnover and frequent use. The University of Maryland, Arlington, and Rockville Town Center West, kind of by the World of Beers, kind of uses this model for higher rates to generate revenue. These are all options for consideration. Just to give you an idea, some public comments did not support the city's provision of free charging because it likened it to providing free fuel, which we don't do. While others suggested that were concerns with affordability. So kind of a Goldilocks approach was suggested by the public. So that, with that concludes staff's presentation. We will go back to the first feedback question, and we welcome your comments and questions and feedback.
Thank you. I will just say, super excited about this plan. I know that we've been waiting on it, and I wanted to applaud the team on the community outreach. I think it's some of the best I've seen. I've seen it all from the climate action plan to this plan. I've played with the interactive map you've had on Engage Rockville. So I think this is a great model for how we engage the community. And I think you got a lot of feedback and, you know, in terms of people identifying where they felt like they needed it or not across the city to help ensure equity. So just a quick kudos on that. I have some broader questions, but I'm going to stick to your questions first, so we get through what you want to get through. Let me just go to my colleagues to see if they want to weigh in on this first feedback. Dr. Miles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I echo or thanks to you, staff. I'm super excited about this agenda item as well. In terms of feedback one, which are the following options? Certainly Model 1 makes sense. We do have, at least I saw out knocking doors, Model 2, I think it was in Rockshire in the townhomes. There's at least one that, again, this might be a private street because it's an HOA, but I saw that they had the units that are, I think, side-to-side townhomes, and the parking was, I don't think there was a sign. No, there is a sign parking. So I think this particular owner of an EV had one installed, and it looks pretty much like Model 2 does. So I certainly would support that. I think the concern I would have is, on the one hand, as you appropriately pointed out, this model, if it's on a public street, it wouldn't necessarily take away a spot. But if I'm thinking about Twin Brook in particular, where I don't think necessarily have assigned parking spots. When sometimes parking can be tight, if somebody does own an EV, it would be tricky for them. Every night it's like a dice game whether or not they can park there. So I would, potentially support. I don't know if we have this here. I've seen it in some jurisdictions where a person who, for example, has a handicap placard but parks on the street in which they don't have parking, they have a designated spot, and it says this is handicap parking on this in front of this person's house, and it usually allows them to park there. So I would support something like that to make sure that in places where there aren't no driveways and when people have street parking, that option exists. 3 and 4, I think what we have seen in terms of number of house fires associated with charges is that people sometimes don't use appropriate cords or plugs. So if we support those, we would just have to be, I don't have to, talk to y'all, tell you about this, but just make sure whatever cord is being used is appropriate, as is the outlet, the socket. I do worry about, for those who walk or roll or mobility challenge, particularly Model 4, may present some concern, but I imagine there are ways to work around it, though I am supportive of an option that allows some flexibility, that allows for, a space not to be necessarily designated, but offers people ability to charge. The trick, though, similar to Model 2, is that cords are only so long. So even if this is a possibility, and they couldn't park in front of their house, they would have to use their neighbors, I don't know. It just makes it a little more tricky. I've spoken too much, but certainly in support of 1 and 2 with the ability to have a resident, particularly like in Twin Brook or other places, to have a designated spot to the extent that that's possible. That's all.
I have a couple quick questions, and I then I'll see Councilman Van Grack, Councilman Fulton, and then Councilman Valeri. So I wonder, in townhome communities where people do have designated spots, could they do could you do Model 2 now or not? I think it exists. So
Private, yes.
So if it's their private, if they have their own space, I just wanted to note that it makes sense that they would be allowed to put a charger like you see in Model 2. I would not want to inadvertently take that away. So I just want to make sure we're very clear on that. The other comment is, I know, I've said this in the past, I'm very concerned about people who live in multifamily units, whether that's condo or renters, as well as people who don't have garages. So I that's part of why we kind of started we need to make sure that the city and partners and private entities are trying to put chargers around so that people who don't have that option can find places to charge. So that's just a broad comment. With that said, when it comes to people wanting chargers on their own space, I just had a question about a 5th model. And my 5th model question is, I've seen, I'm thinking of a particular street where someone has built a semicircle in their front yard or they built part of their front yard out to be able to pull their car in front of their house. Is there anything in our code that would prevent people from being able to do that?
Are you talking about a driveway apron?
They have, I'm not sure if the exact terminology, but it's, they have the front of their house, and then they built there's 2 models. One is a semicircle so their car could drive in, and this house has 3 electric vehicles, for example. And so it allows them to not have to extend a cord to the street, but they can actually go right in and charge their 3 cars. They do not have a garage.
Yes, so that would be like them creating a driveway. And
Correct.
that we already have an existing process for driveway aprons and a program for that.
Okay, so but I think that's an important model because some people currently have grass in front of their house. Maybe there's a way to use permeable pavement to still reach our climate action goals, but make sure that is clear that that is one of the options because it's not shown here. Like you can do that.
Yeah, that is actually the first option that's preferred before even Model 2 goes forward. So for the county, they require the property owners to evaluate and see if you have site conditions, grades, trees, or utilities aren't impacting to see if you can install a driveway. So that meets your needs, you have off-street parking.
And if they put in a permeable driveway, because I know the city also has this, you cannot cover but certain percentage. If they put permeable, and I know the cities use that on some sidewalks, could they still, get around that issue of how much you can cover with a certain kind of substance? It's like a percentage that you can't cover.
We would have to look into that one a little bit more, Mayor. But the models you're describing are exactly what we're looking for. The more folks that can take their EV and have the EV charging actually on private property, the better. So I agree with you. There's models 5, 6, and 7. The models we're looking for feedback tonight, these 4 are only when the EV infrastructure has to be within public right of way. That's what we're looking for.
Totally agree. But I'm just saying that some people have encountered problems because of what we allow from the planning department. And I think there needs to be coordination between your department, Public Works and planning to revisit that. If people can use permeable ground, then we may need to look at that so that we're allowing people to put chargers.
Yeah, there would be coordination with that if the site conditions meet that.
Okay, all right. And for Model 4, just to piggyback on my colleagues, does that cause any trip hazards or challenges for wheelchairs and walkers?
We haven't tested it out. We've heard anecdotally. If you have the correct one that meets the ADA with the certain height requirements, and you received an attachment with DC specs that meets ADA, so you have a certain amount of height and a certain amount of distance across for that. They have bet that, and people with strollers or mobility devices. If you have many together clustered, I don't know if that would be a problem. But yeah.
This one gives me pause we're trying to be a more accessible city. And so thinking of people with walkers, people who have mobility concerns. And then you're also relying on the homeowner to put it down correctly. So I think that's a challenge. I want to be flexible, and that's why I was trying to propose, maybe we can work with planning and DPW to make it easier for people to put it on their private property. But I could see challenges with this. And if someone trips because of this Model 4, is that on the city because it's our sidewalk, or is it on the homeowner?
A lot of variables on that, Mayor. Honestly, we'd have to look into the details on that,
well,
but it's a concern, yes.
With that, I'm very concerned with option 4. Model 3, is that one not a trip hazard? It kind of lays down flat? And you have to assume that the resident really stuffs it in there, right?
Yes, there's a cover, and some of them lock. There's different options for that. So there isn't a trip hazard, and there's a certain distance, and there's a cover, so it's not open for a trip hazard.
I'm open to this one. I just also can anticipate the emails we'll get with someone's parked in my parking spot. So there'd have to be something written and acknowledge that this is not your spot. I want to offer flexibility, but I do want to know that that is something that I can anticipate will happen. Councilman Van Grack.
First, just to be clear, kind of going off what the mayor said, anything that you do on your property, whether it's creating more driveway, adding from your apron to garage, completely allowed under the code. That's what it's not.
It's not currently.
You still need an apron.
Correct. Yes.
Still an apron permit and everything, and you still have that front area coverage requirement.
Correct.
And so there are limitations, but yes, that would be what we encouraged. put it on your, if you don't have a driveway, put one in.
Yeah, so, yes, so there is obviously a permitting process that you need to go through, but it doesn't affect the city's right-of-way or need a new policy, which is what we're dealing with here.
It does affect the right-of-way. Need a new policy because we already have one for driveway aprons.
Yeah, it does affect right-of-way and potential the process. It affects right-of-way and process because they'd have to put a driveway apron and potentially this lot coverage issue needs to be addressed.
So how does that, I mean, if that's something, I mean, how does that interplay to what we're dealing with here?
It doesn't. Practically, if they don't have a driveway, there's usually, and they have their space on the property, the permitting, the lot coverage usually doesn't come into play. They can usually do it.
Okay. So in a vacuum, all four of these ideas are great. Problem is we don't live in a vacuum. Number one, I absolutely support. But the problem that we're going to have, especially with models 3 and 4, you say that model 4 is with an ADA required slope, but we already know that within the city we've got compliance problems and we've got issues with regard to other property issues where people aren't necessarily compliant. Even if they're doing it properly, people are going to think, oh, well, maybe I can get away with it. And we're going to have trip hazards. We already have an issue of compliance. I have a significant difficulty with regard to 3 and 4 with what we're going to be presuming in a vacuum that it's going to be flat and rollable or walkable, when in reality, how it's applied might not necessarily make it so. So because of those risks, and I know my colleagues have brought this up before, I have a significant concern with regard to 3 and 4. Model 2 probably does not create that same hazard, but it creates a similar risk. While we're going to have to adjust an entire parking scheme if we're going to now allow someone to reserve a spot on a city street with regard to, because of their investment with regard to a resident installed charging, when for all we know, they move next week. And if they move, does someone else, is that spot still reserved for the house? It opens up a potential can of worms.
Can I just clarify that Montgomery County and Tacoma Park do not reserve that spot?
Oh, I know, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying, like, other of my colleagues have said that could be a potential solution. If we're doing that, then we're already creating another problem. And I agree with you. No other jurisdiction that I know of allows a reserved spot for an install of a resident charging. So I think it potentially opens up a can of worms as to what we're dealing with. I definitely support Model 2, but Model 1, but 2, 3, and 4, I have significant pause.
Thank you. Councilmember Fulton.
Thanks. I'll try to be quick. I support Model 1. I support Model 3 if it's done well and we have some good enforcement and sort of guidance around it. I absolutely do not support Model 4 for all of the reasons discussed. We talk about wheelchairs and walkers. It's people with vision impairments don't do well with lots of random bumps showing up as well, even if it's ADA compliant from a rolling accessible perspective. So I don't like Model 4. I'm somewhat ambivalent on Model 2. I think it's going to create a lot of problems and doesn't solve a lot of problems. But 1 I'm in favor of, 3 I'm in favor of, 4 I'm definitely not. I'm hesitant on Model 2. The other comment I'll make, I understand that we're talking about public spaces here. That's what this is about. But to the extent that we are talking also now about what people do on their private property, I have real hesitation about making changes to those zoning or lot coverage rules specifically for EV chargers. Somebody could want to plant a garden. Somebody could want to do something else. So I think that opens up, that is an entirely different conversation, and we shouldn't be carving out particular things as a one-off conversation. Those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Councilmember Valeri.
Okay, this is a fun topic for me. I have a question. I have seen many Model 2s installed in the public right-of-way. Would there be any effort to bring folks into compliance or grandfather in those individuals that may have proceeded ahead without guidance? And
You'd
I
inspect
don't feel
them?
comfortable sharing more details than that in public.
We would inspect anybody who's going ahead without it to see if they're in compliance. If they are, if you permit this, we will do it. If not, we will not. We'll make them take it out.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we won't like penalize folks if they're in compliance and, you know, all those things are in place. But I have seen many. That's why I was a little like, oh, I guess this is a new issue. I completely appreciate the want to look at flexible options. However, 4 is not, for the reasons both all my colleagues have stated, 4 is not tenable. We already have random bumps and cracks in our sidewalks, so I wouldn't want to add to that. And I actually love Model 3. I think if done well, and it is actually flush with the sidewalk. Again, looking at enforcement to ensure that it is actually flush with the sidewalk. I think that that is the best option. I think I discussed, I'm okay with Model 1. In general, to kind of to the point that some of my colleagues have brought up, I'm less inclined to legislate issues around public parking, public on-street parking. I'm intensely uncomfortable with that, whether it is permit parking or it is setting aside a space. And frankly, setting aside a space for a high-end vehicle, which electric vehicles are almost twice the amount to buy one as a gas power car. I am not in favor of setting aside with any sort of special privileges just because you can afford an electric car. No offense to any of my colleagues who have one.
Thank you. Just to clarify, none of these options are setting aside.
That's correct. We just
Right.
mentioned that.
Okay, all right, just want to clarify.
Okay, yeah, and I guess if we were looking at that as an option, I think still my point stands that in terms of equity, the discussion itself is inequitable because most people cannot afford an electric car yet. And that's just the reality on the ground.
Thank you. Councilmember Jackson is next, and then Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. And first, let me just say, thank you for all the work on this, on the EV plan. It is, I read through it twice, read through it again. There's a lot there, and it's obvious how much work went into this plan. I commend you all for putting together an excellent plan, and as the mayor said, engaging with citizens, residents of Rockville. I think, you know, when you look back at the engagements that we had, there were many, and I think you ought to be applauded for doing that work and the work of the report. On the options that are in front of us, I would just be quick and say yes on option number 1. I really like that one. I don't really like the resident installed charger that much, but it's probably my second favorite. I like the option 3 if we can do it right, or if we can make sure that it's implemented right. There are, you know, I could see situations where it's not implemented right and we create a hazard for people walking down the sidewalk. As everybody stated, I really don't like option 4. I think that is hazardous to walkers, strollers, wheelchairs, vision impaired people. So yes, I support every other option, various, various, whatever. But I don't support option 4. So that's how I feel on that.
Councilmember Shaw.
I just want to echo my colleagues and thank you for the excellent work and presentation. I like the combination. I support a combination between 1 and 3, so 1, 2, and 3. I just like my other colleagues have shared, Model 4, my concern is the safety and accessibility. However, I do like the notion of it being temporary.
Do you have clear guidance, or do you have follow-up questions from us on this? I think you have.
Yep.
You see that everyone agrees with 1.
I heard support.
No one likes 4.
I heard support for 1, 2, and 3, no support for 4, and I heard very clearly the devil's in the details. So we'll
Yeah,
make
and
sure to get it
I
right.
heard also option 2 is a maybe for some people.
Yep, agreed.
Okay.
Thank you. And now we're moving on to the second one for accessibility and flexibility with parking space minimums for retrofits.
So in this one, you could tell us yes or no, if you want to keep it simple.
Let's start. Dr. Miles, you want to start us off?
In terms of feedback too?
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that there should be some flexibility in zoning that will allow for accessible charging when available. I think that you all gave the example of Master Panic Park, which there was some flexibility there. I don't want to make charging the purview of only those who are able-bodied. So to that end, I would support flexibility when appropriate, when able.
Councilmember Valeri.
Absolute yes.
Councilmember Fulton, you would normally be sitting on this side, so I'm calling on you next.
Yes, absolutely support.
Okay. I also support.
Yes, I support.
I also support.
And I support, again, with what Dr. Miles was saying, when appropriate. I don't think we should be retrofitting everything, and there's going to be necessarily parking lots where we don't want to take away a parking space, but clearly when appropriate, this is something that I would absolutely support.
Thank you. Now we're on to number 3, the philosophy for setting a user rate for city-owned and operating charging. And there's 3 options. I don't know where you'll fall on the Goldilocks method of the right size approach, no fee, cost recovery, or revenue generation.
Can we start down this side first? Okay, and I see Councilman Shaw has a question before responding.
So I also want to thank you for the work that you did on the equity piece in the report. Can you share a little bit, if you have this data, on, and Councilmember Valeri did touch on this briefly, the income levels that are able to afford an electric vehicle? Or do you have some information on that?
Well, we did look at sort of the cost differentials, and in some cases for some models of vehicles, there isn't any. And there are, so far, we still have tax credits for new vehicles of up to $7,500. And used vehicles, depending on certain models, can also get a tax credit of $4,000. Actually, I think since January, some dealerships can offer that up front. So it's a discount on the cost. And then there's also lower operations costs and lower fuel costs generally going forward. So there's a bit of a, I think a lot of people are hesitant to use a new technology, but I think it's more accessible than a lot of people may realize. And as more vehicles enter the market, more models, more used vehicles enter the market, the prices will continue to fall as they have been.
2035, Maryland is saying this is, electric cars or some sort of low emission car, like either hybrid or other types that may come out in the future, will be the model going forward after 2035. We'll see if that sticks, but I know that has been mentioned as a goal in the state. Is that right?
Yes, Maryland has an overall goal, and that's what the projections were based on.
Councilman Shaw.
Just a follow-up question. So Do you have any data on it right now on which income brackets will have an EV?
I don't think we analyzed it. I'm not sure if we have data at that level. We know sort of generally per census tract what the EV registrations are, and there is differentials across the city in different neighborhoods. But I think one of our goals was not to preclude the fact that lower income people might be interested in them. Once if they find one with a lower price range. Some of the Nissan Leafs from several years ago are $10,000 or something. But it continues to be something that we're looking at and making sure we're connecting residents to the incentives. There's state rebates as well and installing charger rebates. But we didn't want to assume before people had a chance to learn more about it and get familiar with the technology and so forth.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking, just in terms of the cost, it could have more of a disproportionate impact based on income level. So that's why I was asking about current data.
Yes, point well taken. I think this is something that we were, keeping front of mind as we're developing the plan. Is how to make this more accessible. What can we do in that area?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fulton also had a question before we weigh in.
Thank you. I appreciate it. On number 3, I want to make sure I understand it correctly. And I'm thinking about a conversation we had earlier about the revenue generated from speed cameras. When I read the description here, yes, it does generate revenue, but its actual primary purpose of the fee is to influence behavior, right? And the revenue generated is in some ways a byproduct. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding it right. It's because particularly Arlington is not really charging for the power. They're charging a fee if you stay a long time.
Correct. Yeah, it's not a money maker, but it's a little bit of a higher level that more than offsets costs.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so with that, I actually support number 3 with not too much of a cost after a period of time. That's where I would weigh in.
She's getting the line. Thank you. Councilman Van Grack, back to you.
I think that the comments that both of my colleagues just said before weigh into the fact that there is uncertainty here. And I think I would support currently the number 2, the Goldilocks cost recovery. Depending on how things transpire, we can move to the revenue generation, or we can move to no fee, depending on how things and people act. But we don't know how people are going to act. We don't know whether lower income or higher income, where things are going to happen. So I would support the Goldilocks and see where we go and adjust it as needed.
I also would support 2, and I would like to have this informed by more data. Thank you.
So I guess I'm on the same boat. I like more data, but for purposes of tonight, for answering the question, I too like option C, the revenue generation, but not because of revenue generation, because of, as Councilmember Fulton was talking about, the purpose behind it, which is to get people moving off the charging station. But I also like the cost recovery option. And as Councilmember Van Grack said, I mean, we don't know where exactly this is going in the future. So I support C and then B, but also encourage you guys to be creative with what you're proposing, because I could see some times when maybe the city wants to offer free or no fee charging for events or for other things that are happening. So, I would say, don't lock yourself in to those 2 models that I've said I support. I want to see what you can come up with as well.
Thank you. As an EV user, I think I see a mixture of 2 and 3. If you are putting something on the rec centers, for example, you want people to move their vehicles. You don't want them staying for hours and just leaving it there. If you're putting them in residential neighborhoods, I could see someone is charging at night, needs to go to sleep, and they're not going to wake up at 3 a.m. to pull their car off. So that's one where I kind of lean towards the cost recovery model. So I think it depends on the location is where you would put the model. In general, I think this has to pay for itself. I think we're not necessarily. I want to be able to, provide the access, but I don't necessarily want to unfairly pay for anyone's, fuel, whatever type of fuel they're using cost. So that's my general comment, is that I would want staff to come up with where they'd place this model, either 2 or 3, based on location. So, and I would also say, if we're in multifamily buildings, I would also do on the cost recovery model. So for me, 3 is more on rec centers, places where you're trying to move people in and out quickly, but with residential predominant areas where you're trying to let people sleep and charge, because people do charge overnight, I would do the cost recovery model.
So in particular on this feedback piece, I really reflect back on the economic equity issues that this brings to fore. For special events, we would never pay for someone's gas to get to the special event. So I can in no way, shape, or form, unless we start paying for gas, support a no fee. That is absolute preferential treatment to a certain class of owners. Frankly, I'm on number 3 for a variety of reasons, even for someone in their own home, not for behavior modification, which is where red light and speed cameras come into, but because EV owners have greater access than hybrid owners or gas-powered car owners to various, like you were mentioning, like I don't know that anybody else could get a rebate up front to purchase their car if it's not an EV. And there is an extreme equity issue here. And I actually leaned over and I was to my colleagues who own EVs. I'm like, please don't take any of this personally. But when the average cost of the electric car is $53,000, average cost of a hybrid is $39,000, and the average cost of a gas-powered car is $30,000, and that's an average. This is a particular income level. To my colleague's point, I don't really need to see an analysis of the income level to know who has the ability to afford what type of vehicle. A. B, we have large swaths of the city where people have access to no car. And in particular, in certain census tracts, as you mentioned, you will not see folks able to own a car, period. So given that in the back of my head, I think that, and it's historically noted that once you get to a certain income level, people are more likely to support fees and so forth if it goes to the long-term goal, and because those individuals have more expendable income. So for me, I think it's actually the reverse of something that Councilmember Van Grack said, which is let's start with revenue generation until we hit a peak population where these cars are more accessible to greater swaths of people, and then we can titrate down to cost recovery. I know I'm personally very concerned, given the state of our power grid broadly, to plan for a great expanse of EV adoption. Our state needs to get their act together when it comes to our power grid. And I say that, thank you, state, but it's true. So I would be concerned there. I'm not trying to, I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, that I'm trying to penalize people for having electric vehicles, but there are already a lot of privileges for EV owners that hybrid and gas-powered car owners don't have. So that for that reason, I could really only support revenue generation.
Thank you. Dr. Miles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to take a slightly different tack looking at one of our jurisdictions in which we have our MML conference, which is Ocean City. Of note, they have a number of free level 2 charging, and they put them in places where they want to attract people. So they put them on the boardwalk, and I can't tell you how much extra money I spend at arcades because there's a free charger, and the little one wants to play arcade games. So I think there are certainly places in the city where we want to generate foot traffic and visits. And in those instances, perhaps starting at no fee and see how it goes. Even at Montgomery Mall, for example, they had a number of no fee chargers, but now they're starting to charge because people are using them. So I am in favor of certainly a range of options. If there are places where we want to incentivize traffic, like the center, as we call it now, then perhaps starting with a no fee and then gradually increasing if we're seeing they're being overused. The hope is that you're encouraging more visits so that people are actually shopping in the areas. But generally speaking, I think cost recovery makes sense in the long term, as we are seeing with a number of jurisdictions that started with no fee, but then have switched to the cost recovery model. That's all I got. Thank you.
Councilmember Fulton.
Thank you. And thanks to the robust comments of my colleagues, I just want to give a little bit of a modification to what I said before. People had great thoughts. First, I really, really don't support no fee in any situation. I didn't originally, but based on these conversations, I feel that more strongly. I kind of like the model of, yes, we want to generate people moving going to places, but we wouldn't offer them a gas card. So I don't know why we'd pay for their electric vehicle. However, on the revenue generation, I think the mayor made a good point on it needs to be adaptable and there needs to be a scale, depending on the location. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't put a behavioral incentive even on overnight. It should just be a longer period of time, right? We need to be thoughtful about the location and how much we want to incentivize people to move along. So somewhere between cost recovery, but still much closer to revenue generation, but not having one standard that applies regardless of the type of facility in play. I hope that made sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Van Grack.
I just want to add to what a couple of my colleagues have said. There are definitely going to be, in my opinion, likely locations where we do want to encourage a turnover. And one of the examples that I'd use is the swim center. There have been numerous times that I've tried to get a parking and there is no parking there anyway. And if someone is also utilizing, even at a cost recovery, at those types of heavily trafficked area where we want to encourage turnout, the revenue generation makes a lot of sense. So there are definitely locations where we don't want to have the no fee because we don't want to encourage people being there for hours when they're not actually using, for example, a city facility.
Thank you. I'll just note, the only place I support no fee is when we're charging a city employees and charging a city vehicle to use for city purposes. So I just want to clarify that. I don't think we're charging ourselves, but I also wanted to make one other comment related to this, just from my experience on driving. So people may not know this, but sometimes people in multifamily units are further hurt by, and I've learned this from talking to some of the regional sort of EV experts. When I charge in my home, right, I can use my home rate, and it's lower than on a property. Sometimes at multifamily, people are being charged commercial rates, and that I've raised last term, and I wanted to raise it again here. I don't think it's fair. And so some of these revenue generation prices are much higher than what it would cost someone to charge at home. And so that's kind of why I wanted to, you are the experts. I want to make sure that we're thinking about multifamily home owners, people who are in townhomes. If we're putting them in those kinds of neighborhoods and residential, that's why I was also on the cost recovery side. There is an equity perspective. I think the other thing I wanted to mention is sometimes superchargers cost more money. So if you're doing a higher level of charger, you're also trying to encourage a quick turn. And so that's another place I would support, incentivizing moving your vehicle after X time. That's all I have to say about that. Mr. Mihalik.
So what I heard that there is support for both a blend of cost recovery and revenue generation. We should be strategic. We should identify those areas where we want to turn over and make that more revenue generation. So I think we should experiment with both of those types of models. And then what's really important, I think, is to track the data. Because if we put in some revenue generation stations and nobody's using them, then that means it's not working, and maybe we can convert them. So that's be my recommendation to you based on your feedback. Thank you, Mayor.
I think that's a smart approach to, also analyze the data. I will also note that I'm going to put on my climate action and sustainability hat. When we don't move away from fossil fuels, we all pay. Think about the cost of a water main break that the city pays for, the cost of flooding to residents. I just think that we're trying to incentivize behavior, and hopefully we'll have less reliance on fossil fuels. We need diverse sources of energy, but I think to the climate action plan, we're really trying to do that. I will also add that I think it's important, because, and this is where I'm going with this, that the city looks at putting solar or geothermal on our city facilities, because otherwise we're just continuing to use fossil fuels in a different way. So I just wanted to make that point of how that also ties to our climate action plan. And I believe our budget anticipates potentially 2 this fiscal year on city property, going through the last budget KFIs. So I know that's not the point of this presentation, but I look forward to hearing about that in April. Jeff, you knew that was coming. All right, thank you. I have a few other questions. Can I just go through those real quick? And I know Councilmember Miles has some. Dr. Miles, you go first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you to my colleagues. I'll make it quick. One of the big points with regard to charging I want to emphasize, and you all spoke to it in the report, is the issue of equity. Years ago when Pepco put in their pilot project, I think there were only 1 or 2 of them that were east of 355, which is an issue. Of note, while I think there's still a disparity in terms of how many we see on east of 355. But of note, I'm thinking about folks west of 270, recognizing that it is a lot of pretty much, I think, single family west of 270. However, on the map, as you'll see, there's not a whole lot happening. I think the one, was that King Farm in the triangle, the far left there? I don't even think it's King Farm. It might be Falls Grove.
Can I just say, can you leave it on the first map, the one with the little circles?
So I guess the main point I want to emphasize is just to be mindful that as we see, so there's 270. I think there's one that might be Falls Grove. I think there might be Thomas Farm. There's another park further south, I think, like Potomac Woods Park, or if, for example, if the county were to do something on Falls Road local park or something like that, just from an equity standpoint. But I do recognize that the housing type is different. Again, west of 270, mostly single family. A lot of them do have garages. There's a mix between 355 and 270. Then east of 355, it's mainly Twinbrook and a lot of on-street parking where charging is really dicey. That's all.
I appreciate you making that point, because I was going to make it too. So thank you. I totally agree on west of 270. And if you look in that right corner as well, on the lower side, it looks like there could be more charging there. The other thing that stood out to me, in addition to what Dr. Miles said, is the fast charging is paltry, it looks like to me. And that access to that throughout the city is critical, right? It actually drives economic activity. I may plan a trip based on where you can find a flash charger, and you'll see that it's not in the city, but some of the Royal Farms and Sheets are starting to do that because they want people to come shop at their location. So I don't care how we do it, if we can partner with commercial sites to do it, but we definitely need more fast chargers to make this work. The slow chargers it could take 7 hours, and that's not a viable charging, in my opinion. So that's the comment I wanted to make. I was just curious if there's a map that overlays where the multifamily housing is, and I just wanted to see if we have that planned for.
Keep going.
Combine those two.
Yeah, just to combine the map with the multi.
Yeah, that's where the tool, it's hard at this level, so that's why we created an online tool so that you could click all of these different things. The multi-unit properties are like the darker red on this slide, so you can see kind of the clusters along 355 in the south, areas in King Farm, Falls Grove, obviously in Town Center, and a few other areas along 355.
So I'm looking at a couple of those dark reds and not seeing charging around there. So I would look to you as experts to help us figure that out. So I want to, again, I'm pretty serious that people who live in multifamily units or some townhomes cannot have this option because it is not viable for them. I also wanted to see, I sent a question in to Mr. Mihalik and talked about the need to coordinate with commercial, people who are renting as a commercial tenant, people who are renting as a residential tenant, and more broadly HOAs. There needs to be planned meetings throughout the city in collaboration with the Clean Energy Center, Montgomery County Green Bank. I know I did something several months ago, but we need to help get to yes on those properties so that it's a real option for people. I just think that range is an issue and charging is an issue. So I don't know if you have those mapped out throughout the year when you're gonna, if we have a list of HOAs that we're working through or commercial properties we're working through, but I do think that needs to be some timing for that implementation.
Yeah, thank you. That's definitely a focus. We want to make sure that our codes align and the process is streamlined, so when we go and engage them, we can have clear guidance for them to help them along in the process.
Okay, and then in some cases when we have or allow companies, I know Pepco has helped provide free charging, but when people are using public right-of-way, will we have policies for abandoned chargers or when software becomes obsolete? That could be an issue in the future, and I just wanted to think about that in advance.
The last few ones we've done for the Swim and Fitness Center and the Pepco, there was a license agreement which had provisions for if it's abandoned or that they need to remove it.
Okay, I just think that's a model going forward. We can't just have abandoned chargers and people plug in and think it's working and it's not, or just it shows on the map and then it's not, and we don't want to junk up city property either. So you noted that you're working on guidelines and you put short-term as 0 to 3 year. I wasn't sure if that is more closer to the 1 year versus 3. I mention it because we have a building code that we all approved in May, I think, or around that time, where we already have requirements for new buildings to have certain things. So do we have guidelines for those properties that are actively
New
being
buildings
built?
are easier because they go along with the process. It's the retrofits that are a little more challenging, whether it's a site plan amendment or different building codes or just dealing with existing infrastructure.
Okay. I'm just going to note that, this is Monique speaking, I do think that if we're going to move this along, we probably need to have guidelines sooner than later so that people, as part of our outreach, we can start getting them to move according to the way, you see as best practice. And then looking through the feedback from the community, there was a comment on section 4.4 on page 396 that relates to how we talk about accessibility. It came from our chair, the chair of the Transportation Mobility Commission, related to language around accessibility and ADA. Did you all address that comment already in this draft?
Yes, we shared the language and the changes with her, and we've also shared opportunities to talk with our building plannings examiner who looks at these.
Okay,
So
I just
we're
want to make sure we're
coordinating on
thinking
that.
about accessibility. Thank you. Councilmember Valeri.
I apologize. I was like preemptively thanking you. I didn't realize we were still asking questions. I wanted to note between this map and the other one, it was hard for me to tell, and also my eyesight's not the best. Is the Twin Brook Metro also included? I know that we that the community was looking at one at Rockville Metro, but is the Twin Brook Metro, is that also on the target list? And if not, why not?
So we have one off by the Twin Brook Quarter, so it's near there, near the Safeway. So it's not in the Metro parking lot, but it's on street. We already have an existing
Is
Pepco
on
site.
street
Mhm.
on Buick on
Yes.
street or on, okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just wanted, again, that's my equity lens. The other thing that I flinched a little, and it was nothing that you guys did, I flinched a little at the items that are pending federal funding, as far as being able to get those. Wanted to note my flinching for my colleagues and for the public, and then hopefully we're looking at a plan B to be able to continue to push forward this plan, acknowledging that we may be having funding difficulties given the tenor of, especially around environmental issues right now. So that's all I'll say on that. And yeah, I think I was the only one that didn't say thank you to you all. There's a tremendous amount of work, and I am really excited to play around with the mapping tool. I'm very excited to see, and some thoughtfulness to it as well. But in general, I'm definitely not against EV readiness. I'm just hopeful we get to a place where it is actually monetarily accessible to people.
I had one other comment, sorry, on the variable pricing. I know that electricity is charged at different rates based on the time of day. So I'm assuming, I just want to flag it, that you would adjust for that so that we're not end up subsidizing.
Yes, we would have to look at it. It depends on where we're located because there are 4 different rates across our 150 Pepco accounts. So we'll have to, and we, from anywhere from a year to 2 to 5 year terms, we would look at. So we would look overall with the city and have to set a blanket. It would be easier to set a blanket rate. We usually get fixed rates for those though.
Okay.
Because we have electricity supply at a fixed rate.
Okay, all right. It said dance between, is it so expensive that no one's using it? And then also we need to have cost recovery. So I just wanted to make that point that I do know that most people who charge know that electricity is more expensive at certain hours. So,
yes.
And that they pay for that. And then your map, did you factor into putting, Councilmember Miles mentioned it, and I think it's a good one. I know we've talked about this in the past, but we're, in addition to the rec centers, putting it at parks. Does a map show them at parks?
So we have it at the Civic Center Park. There were a few ones that are not, there are additional, and I think it's Appendix H that we're still working on that includes parks. We've prioritized some of the high-use facilities first, and then we're also, although we do have it at Manny Stepanek Park, we're also looking at other locations. So this is not the end-all, be-all, we're continuing to work, but this was the first additions that kind of worked in with funding opportunities and all the criteria that we could leverage outside funding.
Yeah, it occurred to me that that could be one of the equity considerations because the city seeks to have a park within 10 minutes walk. And so that's one of the better ways to potentially put it in more parts of the city where people don't necessarily have it on their own.
Yeah, we can clarify that in the final plan.
Dr. Miles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One point of clarification, one just point. The green building code, isn't that coming back to us in June of this year? Or?
That's correct.
Okay, I know we voted, but I just wanted to make sure I was tracking appropriately. The final point about electric vehicle costs, this is a great story on PBS NewsHour, February 9th. It shows the uptake of EVs in unlikely places like Utah, primarily because of cost. Used EVs can be priced around $10,000. So just, it's a good food for thought for those concerned about the cost of electric vehicles. That's all.
Councilmember Larry.
Super quick. In noting Richard Montgomery on this list of community suggested public charging locations, would the target for that be the staff and students, and then safety concerns regarding individuals who are not visitors, teachers, or students utilizing a charging location at a school?
So the Richard Montgomery was a request from the public. It was one of the crowdsourced ones. Okay. We reached out to MCPS and they haven't identified sites yet. So this is just reflecting where people are interested in it.
Yeah.
They do not have plans yet because obviously they have a lot of real estate that they would have to think about and all of those policies that they would have to
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Thank you.
So Richard Montgomery, I'm glad you mentioned that one. We work with them because they have a parking shortage given the portables that are on their parking spaces. And the city worked with them to create a permit parking opportunity for spaces that are in front of the school. So I would imagine that one of the city spaces could be used for that. that would serve Richard Montgomery, but also it's on our controlled space. So I just wanted to flag that as an opportunity to get something at Richard Montgomery and align with the feedback from residents. The last thing I'll just mention is related to this in the climate action plan. So we offer a sort of a permit parking waiver during Earth Month. I haven't seen advertisements about it yet. Just wanted to confirm that that is still happening.
We're still going to do that. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I just want to make sure that anyone who is thinking about doing a heat pump or, those kinds of, we're trying to reduce greenhouse gases from buildings and transportation. Usually you have to schedule those in advance. So we kind of want to have notices going out to the public in the month of February. So if we could plan for that next year and then get this one out as soon as possible. Thank you. You all did a fantastic job. Thank you for taking all of our questions and working on this fantastic plan. We really appreciate all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're now moving on to mock agenda. I know that we had a chance to review the draft agendas shared and folks gave feedback, but is everyone good? Does anyone have any additional questions? Okay. Seeing none, moving on to item 14, old new business. So I think Mr. Winborn had something for us on this one. Just related to the proclamation request that came in.
Danny?
Yes, I sent it to Mayor and Council earlier today about this one.
Do you want to introduce what you're asking, Mayor and Council?
Okay, yes, sure. We got a resolution, a proclamation request for Global Love Day. And it is an international day that recognizes love and peace across the world. And they're asking for a proclamation. They've gotten proclamations from hundreds of individuals here or jurisdictions in the United States and across the globe.
Thank you. And you've looked and vetted on the organization, correct?
Yes, I have. And it is a legitimate organization that's been in place since 2000. So it's been in place for 24 years.
And then my last question is this someone who's a Rockville resident or someone would be coming to Rockville to receive it? Or is this just kind of someone nationally just sending it out to a lot of jurisdictions?
Yes, they've sent it out nationally to jurisdictions and they're asking for us to email it to them. They're not coming to Rockville to potentially receive it.
Thank you. All right, colleagues. Any commentary? Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you. I mean, it's a nice proclamation, but as we were talking about it earlier, I mean, we already have Peace Day, and we already do a proclamation for Peace Day. So I'm not really sure that we need one for Love Day. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilmember Van Grack and then Councilmember Shaw.
The only thing I'd say is if we do it, and I'm not necessarily against it, it can simply be something that we proclaim and send over to them. That's all that we're asking. We don't need to take time away from a meeting.
Councilmember Shaw.
This could be something, I don't have a opinion on this yet, but it could be something that we could just post on the website as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Valeri.
We could also encourage this organization to reach out to the Rockville community and see if there would be someone from Rockville that would support it. I would hesitate to say we have a Peace Day. We have a Love Day as well. It just passed very recently. That we didn't do an official proclamation for, but many of us told our loved ones that we loved them that day. So I agree that, I think the intent is really great, but I would rather see the the initial idea come from a resident or a organization located in Rockville.
Dr. Miles?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm agnostic. I think it could be posted on the website. But like I said, relatively agnostic, and we'll go with the will of the body.
I will just say, oh, Councilmember Fulton, you're next. Sorry.
Oh, it's her favorite.
I guess I'm agnostic too, particularly if we're just talking about posting on the website versus taking time out of a meeting when it didn't come from the city. I remain worried about the precedent we're setting and like slippery slopes and lines and how this could build to be a whole lot of work for Mr. Winboard to post anything anybody wants on the website. But in this particular case, I guess I'm agnostic.
I support love and humanity. I do think that we focus on this during Peace Day. I would be open to sort of emphasizing in our remarks on Peace Day if Dr. Zupanik is open to it. I'm agnostic. I don't, if it were local, I would definitely go for it. But I just, I know we have a lot of proclamations, so. And we said that we were going to try to set guidelines and stick to them. So that's where I stand. All right.
Are you clear on that, Danny?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. This is our first one.
Thank you. Anything else for old new business? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, can I just, I have one thing. I just wanted to bring up, there is a meeting in October and I will let you know, but we just found out that the MML Fall Conference falls on that Monday.
October 13th.
So we have to move that date or cancel that meeting.
Thank you very much. I will note that we are 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Councilmember Leary.
Madam Mayor, I move to adjourn this meeting.
Who wants to second? Don't all. Okay, Councilman Van Grack. It has been seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you to the community, and thank you, staff.